Welcome back to the podcast. It's George. Uh, I'm alone, but I thought I would talk about mental health and anxiety and, especially mental health during COVID and how that's changed everyone's perception on, not on life specifically, but on stuff like that. What made me think of this was I was watching an episode of Emma Chamberlain's podcast called Anything Goes with Emma Chamberlain, and it was lowering your expectations about people and your preconceived knowledge on them. And I was like, wow. And it gave me a lot of ideas of things that I know people have gone through, that I went through, that the world went through, people's perception on things, like how people interact with different topics and stuff like that. So the first thing I was going to talk about is how mental health was played out through COVID. And it was definitely, if you hear any clicking, that's my mouse because I'm going through my different topic notes. Um, was about how the world changed during COVID. Um, especially for teens, because we didn't have um the sorry, I'm umming a lot. We didn't have the same experience as adults because, especially for me, I'm trying to think of how old I was in 2020. Let's see, I'm 15. So I was what, 13, 12, 12 and a half, something like that. It was my first year of sixth grade. We were fine the first year, as fine you can be in middle school because middle school sucks. Those were truly the three worst years of my life. And not just because COVID interrupted it all and changed everything and changed me and changed all my friends, but how we as a not as a society, but well, yeah, as a generation, how we dealt with COVID and how it impacted us because middle school is a very formative experience, especially for high schoolers, but middle school is a formative experience. And when you're not in person or just even around other people or talking to other people, it can be really hard because you don't have that social interaction that you need to be able to get through any trials that you're going through or deal with social pressures or societal pressures or drama, whatever you're going through. You rely on people, and that's a big part of uh, just the human species in general, is that you rely on people heavily through everything, not just for emotional support or anything, but you rely on people for many reasons and for many things. And when you don't have a central group of people that you can rely on, it's hard to experience what you need to experience and be able to not just good experiences, fun experiences, but hard and difficult things that you have to go through, but those are very formative for you as a person and for your own progression through life. And the small things that help you, or the small things you go through now that may seem big, they're really small in the perception of time of your whole life. Going through this little rough patch is not going to ruin your life in the way you might think it will or whatever, or impact it in the way you will, but the way you deal with it will. Because if you build coping, not just coping, but if you build tolerances and you build ways of passing through these hard times, if you build those connections and pathways and mechanisms that will allow you to get through hard times in your life now, later down the road, that'll help you a lot because you already have this established network of A, people, B, coping mechanisms just to get through things. You have a central, not group of people, but well, yeah, a friend group that you can rely on when you're going through a hard time, because that's really important. If you have friends that you can truly trust and tell them everything you want, or a therapist or your parents or a guardian or any family member really, or a friend or something like that, that'll be really helpful to you in your life of getting through different trials. But during COVID, it was really hard because no one had that central group of people that they could rely on, or um, that they could fall back on, especially during a time where everything was so unfamiliar, and not just to us, but to everyone, because no one had really gone through a pandemic. My grandparents, they had the polio epidemic, but that was totally different from what we went through. It was an infectious disease, but people weren't quarantined in the measures that we were, or anything like that. We didn't have mass quarantine. You had quarantine of people who were infected with polio or suspected to be, but you didn't have all quarantine for everyone. And it was hard for teenagers especially to go through this because um, you didn't have friends that you could really talk to. And even if you had people you could talk to over the phone, it's not the same as sitting down with someone and just like spilling, um, or having someone just to be with, not even to say anything. A big part of getting through trials or through healing is just by being around people. It's not necessarily by saying anything. Like, an experience I had with a therapist was, you can talk if you want to talk, but it just helps to be with someone, and it helps to know that there's someone that you can talk to. You don't need to talk to the person, but it's helpful if you can talk to the person. And that's a big thing. So I'd found this statistic online about um, the COVID-19, mental health COVID-19 impact for students. It was students in general. It wasn't just like middle schoolers or high schoolers or people in college. It was all people. But one statistic was 20% of college students said that their mental health had worsened over the pandemic, and nearly 3 in 10 people, which is 29%, of parents said that their child experienced some sort of mental trauma or harm from the pandemic. So, not just like stress or depression, like actual trauma. A lot of kids had trauma from it, and not just in a like traumatic, like if you had a traumatic event happen to you, it's not just in that way, but it's also like it was a series, almost a series of events. It was like you had one thing happen, and then you had another thing happen, and then you got your hopes up and thought it was all over, and then it was like, nope, it's not over. And then it was finally sort of, you could be reintroduced, and then you had different variants come out which affected people in different ways, and then in certain areas it was worse, so certain people couldn't do things that other people could do, which was kind of harmful in its own way. Because if you live, let's say you lived in California where the health restrictions were higher, um, compared to someone who lived in Florida, you would have a very different experience, and it might be harmful to see someone who's having the more, what you would consider, quote unquote, positive experience. Because let's say you're still stuck in your house doing virtual learning, but your other friends get to go to school and get to go like on vacation and get to go to the beach and blah blah blah, um, but you're still stuck at home and you can't leave. That is harmful in its own right. And then for the reverse side of the spectrum, some people had a hard time dealing with knowing that they knew people who were unable to do certain things. It was harmful on them, not because they were going through the negative experience themselves, but because they knew someone who was. And it's like the secondhand trauma. And I'm obviously not a professional. I'm just speaking my mind, and that's all this is commentary. But I definitely noticed a difference in me. And there were certain things that I did that were definitely helpful. And if I hadn't done them, I don't know how I would have gone through it. But luckily, I was able to talk to my friends on the phone a lot. I texted people. I played video games with people when I had free time, stuff like that. Towards the like tail end, I'm gonna say the last like 3 months, we started having more virtual classes, because for a long time it was just like emailing back and forth, and then they started doing Zoom, and they were like, okay, here's the Zoom, and then people weren't having their cameras on because it wasn't a requirement. And then towards the end, they were like, okay, everyone, turn your cameras on. And what was really helpful was a chorus class. I had a virtual chorus class, which I'm sure our chorus teacher was like, how the heck am I going to teach chorus to a bunch of 6th and 7th grade? Well, she taught 6 through 8. So to all these middle schoolers that are at home. And I feel bad for her having to deal with that, but she did. And we all enjoyed what we did, but it was mostly seeing people and hearing people's voices again was really helpful for the people who weren't talking on the phone with people. Cause I wasn't talking to a ton of people. It was mainly like my best friend and like one other person. If you weren't on the phone with someone, you hadn't heard someone else's voice that wasn't someone who lived with you in like 7 months. And it was like, and I mean like a real, not an in-person voice, but like a personable voice, someone that you knew personally, not just someone on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat, someone you knew personally. And I think that is helpful in its own right, was to be able to know that I had people that I could talk to, and then also to have my family in the way that I did. And to have my mom fully present with me was really helpful, because she was able to help me if I had a hard time with school or hard time with life or whatever. But it's definitely easier. It was definitely easier to get through because I had a support net of people. But if I didn't have like my best friend and his little sister and my mom and my dad and my cousins and all my friends from school and my teachers were a big part, especially my chorus teacher. She helped me a lot with like dealing with the stress of not being in person, and then also like just dealing with everything in general. She was very helpful to everyone. She definitely made people feel more like they had a sense of community in her class, and that was really, really, really helpful. And then once we got out of COVID, it was definitely an adjustment, and it was almost a bigger adjustment to get used to going back than it was to get used to being at home. I mean, eventually, like after I'd say after the first like 3 weeks, I was pretty used to everything. And I was like, okay, so there's this and there's that. And I just realized I wasn't talking to the microphone completely. So we'll see how this sounds. There's this and there's that you're doing that you could, or that you weren't doing that you could be doing. And then getting through the experiences that I had with the help of the people around me was really important to me. I'm pretty sure I just said that, but whatever. I'm staring at this bird that is currently sitting on the fence in my backyard, and it's strange, and a turkey just walked across. And be for you, this is May 1st. I don't know why there's a turkey out in the backyard. But our neighbor, like my best friend, there's a lady who lives next door to him that feeds the turkey that come out of the forest. And I guess they just start roaming up the streets, because I have pictures of like them just walking up the road and like walking in our backyard, and just like a herd of them in our backyard. And it's really funny. But if you hear this loud bird, it's this bird that's sitting on the fence. Another thing I was going to talk about is like expectations, because that's what Emma talked about. And I highly encourage you to go watch it. I think it was posted like a day or two ago, but I just listened to it about 2 hours ago. And also, she has the whole vibe that is just very inspiring. She's so chill, but at the same time, she's collected, and she's not like confusing. She'll just sit on her couch and talk, and it makes sense, which is hard to do. So she talks about how there are people in your life that there are basic expectations that people, there's two sides of this. There's basic expectations that people need to live up to for you to include them in your lives. Expectations meaning like almost requirements. And then there's another thing, is you can't expect too much of someone, because that can also change the way you think about someone, or the way that someone is as a person. So not requiring too much while at the same time requiring enough. Now that's a complex like thing, and it kind of sounds sort of redundant. But what it's basically meaning is there are certain expectations you need to have for people, and that'll change from person to person. And then there are also expectations that people there's you shouldn't have an excess amount of expectations. Like if your expectation is for someone to be around you all the time, that is an expectation that is way too high. No one is going to be around you all of the time. Unless you're your child and you watch them, they're not going to be around you all the time. And then also having the expectations of like bare minimums that people need to meet. I'm talking they need to respect you, they need to be kind. Um you need to have a good enough relationship where you like talk for sort of frequently, someone that's not toxic and someone that supports you as a person and whatever way in whatever way. It doesn't have to particularly mean any certain thing, but that they support you in everything you do is it's a basic requirement, yet it's also one of the most important is that you have people around you that support you and aren't going to turn around to someone else and talk badly about you when you're not there, or someone who doesn't really support you fully. You don't want someone who's just like kind of, oh, okay. No, you need someone that's like, I fully support you in this. It's a great idea, blah, blah, blah. They don't necessarily have to agree with it. And I'm not saying that everyone has to agree with you because that's definitely never going to happen. I don't think you're ever going, prove me wrong, but I don't think you're ever going to meet someone that meets every single little like check mark that you want, or every box you want them to meet. They're not going to always be around you. They're not going to love everything you love. They're not going to have all the same opinions as you. That's just not realistic. But as long as you are building this relationship where you sort of not automatically, but you support each other fully. Supporting is definitely different from agreeing. You can be supportive and not agree with someone, and that's a very important thing. They can agree with you on certain things, that's fine, but being supportive and agreeing with someone is totally different, because you can fully support someone and not agree with certain things in their life, whether it be their political background, whether it be like, I don't know, their lifestyle or the religion or their cultural background or whatever. You you don't have to agree with everything. You just need to support each other. And that's a big thing, because for a long time I thought I needed a friend who was going to want to like the same things I like, be around me all the time, talk to me all the time, agree with me on everything politically, lifestylely, religiously, all of this stuff. But I learned there's a very slim chance that you're ever going to find anyone who meets most all or most of your expectations, or your like your perceived notions on a certain topic. You're never going to meet someone that is completely in agreement with you on your I don't think you will. I'm sure you will on everything. Like, you're not going to meet someone who agrees with the same politics, the same religion, the same lifestyle, the same all of those. You're probably not going to find someone who meets all of those boxes, but as long as they check enough of them for you to be friends or have a relationship, like if there's something drastically different between you, yeah, maybe it's not the best idea. Like if someone's like if you're Christian and they're like heavily like, I'm not just talking atheist. I'm talking like they bash you every time, or they bash you for what you believe in. No matter if you're Christian, if you're Jewish, if you're Muslim, if you're what am I trying to say? If you're Hindu, if you're pagan, it doesn't matter. As long as they're not trying to like bash you for what you believe, you don't have to agree on the same thing. I have friends that don't have the same religion as me. I have friends who don't live the same way I do. I have friends that don't believe in the same political party as I do. All these things, right? But we're still friends, and we see past that because we have a deeper connection on a different level, and we support each other. We support each other even though we don't agree on everything, and that's totally fine. You don't need to agree with someone to support someone or to love someone. And loving someone is totally different from I'm not talking romantically. I'm talking about just like, you know, like 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 how you love your mom or you love your dad. That kind of love. Like you really really care about someone. You love them. I don't know what love is supposed to mean because love means a bunch of different things and in totally different contexts it means different things. Right. So love. If you love someone, you don't have to agree with them. And that's a big thing that took me a long time to learn is that one, just because you agree with someone does not mean that you love someone. And just because you love someone does not mean you agree with them. And the latter is the one I focus on the most is that I can love someone and not agree with them. I have plenty of friends that I love, like, I love them as friends, like they're my friends. Um, I have family that I love that I don't agree with everything on, right? I might not agree with my friend on the clothes they wear because I think it's ugly, or I might not agree with a friend because they're dating someone that I think is a jerk, or they're friends with someone who I think, oh, well, that person's crazy. Why are you friends with them? It's not about that. It's about loving them because you have a deep connection with the person, you're strong friends, you support each other, you uh, you're with each other a lot, or you're with each other enough, you have a strong relationship. That constitutes love, because I don't think loving someone is exclusive to romance or to your family. I think you can love your friends, you can love your neighbors, you can love everyone. I don't think it's this whole deep, like, oh, you can only love your family, like your mom and dad, and you can only love your partner or whatever. No, you can love anyone. And I think that's an important thing to think about is you can love anyone. It doesn't matter what your relationship is with them. Love is not like this, you know, not a, oh, I want to get married to you love. It's a, I care about you deeply. We have a connection. No matter what the connection is, we have a connection and we support each other no matter what, no matter our differences. And I think that's something to think about. And then also, just if you're trying, a big thing about making friends when I was younger is I had a hard time because I had all these check boxes, which goes along with expectations. It's the same thing. I had all these things that I wanted people to meet, requirements I wanted them to meet, which weren't realistic. I wanted them to like the same movies I like, to like the same food, like the same clothes, like the same people, like the same music, like the same whatever. I wanted them to, when I was really young, I thought that if you were friends with someone, it was like you could only hang out with that one person or whatever, right? That's not true. Like, I had this weird conceived notion that you could only spend time with one friend. And that's why when I was like little, I only had one friend is or like a couple friends is because I was like, I can't spend time with other people. They're my best friend. But that's not true. You're allowed to spend time with whoever you want. And if someone has something to say about that, they're probably not the person you need to be friends with. Also, if your friend is telling you things, like saying things that are negative about you to you, that's not a good thing. I'm not talking about what they're like, dude, I really do not like those shoes. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like, and they're like, you're ugly, or they'll say these things, or they're like, your friends are really like weird, you shouldn't hang out with them, or I don't like your, I don't know, just if your friends are being negative, they're not true friends. Friends are who support you, they have a connection with you, they're going to support you no matter what you do. Usually, I'm not talking about if you like, I don't know, rob a bank, like, no, but like they'll support you and they care about you no matter what is going on or if you say something or whatever. So I think lowering your expectations is a big deal if you want to make friends, if you want to have a relationship, anything, is not to set your expectations too high because then you're going to bum yourself out. I had that same thing with like expectations for like doing things. So like activities, like I had this expectation, like let's say it was like I was going to, I don't know, the movies, and I had this expectation that we were going to have an amazing time. We were going to get there on time. We were going to love the movie, yada, yada, yada. That's not always going to happen. Your expectations are not always going to get met. Same thing with like expectations if you're going somewhere with someone, like maybe it's not going to be as good as you thought, or you have an activity, like a sports activity, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's going to be so fun. And then you end up having an awful time, right? Lower your expectations, because if you have expectations too high, then most of the time you're going to get bummed out, because most of the time it's not going to meet the expectations you have. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. You also don't want too low expectations, because then sometimes you won't feel motivated. Because if you have no expectations for something, what's the motivation? If you're like, it's gonna be it's gonna be bad. Like, don't say that, because then what, you're gonna want to go? No. Have realistic expectations, and don't set them too low. Don't set them too high. Just make them realistic. Don't make something sound, or don't blow stuff out of proportion. If you're going to some activity, don't expect it to be this high mighty thing that is the best thing you've ever done in your entire life, but also don't expect it to be the worst. Have realistic expectations. Everything you do, everyone you talk to, all the friends you make, and stuff like that. And this was just like not a rant video, but it was a video about how you can, get through hard times and expectations, and how you can like perceive things. But this is just something that was on my mind that I thought I would say. And so there we go. Hope you have a great day. And the next episode should be like a fun, I think we're going to do some conspiracy theories. We're going to deep dive into some, like the Mandela effect. See you next time. Thanks for watching.